Stop everything. What I am about to show you happened 6 hours ago, and if you do not understand what just occurred, you will not be prepared for what comes next. The Supreme Court just detonated a bomb under the entire 2024 election. Every single justice, all 9 of them unanimous, they dissolved the Trump Organization. But here is what you need to understand. This is not about Trump anymore. This is about whether American democracy survives the next 72 hours. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications, because what I have uncovered in the Supreme Court documents, the part mainstream media is completely missing, will determine whether you understand what is actually happening or whether you are getting played. I spent 11 hours reading this ruling, page 47, paragraph 12, 3 sentences that legal scholars are calling the most dangerous language ever written by this court. Language that does not just end Trump's business empire, language that creates a legal weapon that can be used against anyone, and I mean anyone, operating through corporate structures while engaging in systematic misconduct. Hit that subscribe button, turn on all notifications. I will wait, because what comes next will rewrite American politics, and you need to see it here first. Here is what happened at 9:47 this morning Eastern Time. While every cable network focused on the headline, Supreme Court dissolves Trump Organization, while anchors scrambled to explain what dissolution means, while legal analysts debated the financial implications, I did something different. I read the actual ruling, all 63 pages. And on page 47, paragraph 12, I found something that nobody is talking about. 3 sentences that change everything you think you know about this case. Let me give you the surface story first, the version you are hearing everywhere else. The Supreme Court ruled that the Trump Organization engaged in systematic fraud. They cited patterns of misrepresentation spanning from 2015 through 2023, asset valuations inflated to secure loans, then deflated to reduce tax obligations. The same properties reported at wildly different values depending on the audience. Banks, insurers, tax authorities, all receiving different numbers for identical assets. The court found this was not occasional error. This was structural. This was the way the organization functioned. And because the misconduct was embedded in the operational DNA, the only remedy was complete dissolution. Liquidate the assets, terminate the contracts, dissolve the entity. Markets reacted immediately. The Dow dropped 847 points in the first 2 hours of trading. Real estate investment trusts with Trump exposure fell 12 to 18%. Legal analysts called it unprecedented. Political commentators called it the end of an empire, and that is where most coverage stopped. But here is what they missed. Paragraph 12 does not just authorize dissolution of the Trump Organization, it establishes a legal standard. And I need you to hear this language directly, because the implications are staggering. Quote, any corporate entity that demonstrates persistent systematic misrepresentation embedded within its organizational structure, regardless of the political identity or public prominence of its leadership, may be subject to dissolution as a remedial and preventive measure when lesser sanctions have proven ineffective. End quote. Do you see what just happened? The court did not write this ruling narrowly. They wrote it broadly, deliberately. They created a precedent that applies to any organization, any corporate structure, any entity that operates this way. I contacted 3 constitutional law professors within an hour of this ruling. All 3 said the same thing. This language has never appeared in a Supreme Court opinion before. This is new law. This is the court saying, we are drawing a line. And that line does not just apply to Trump. Here is why this matters right now, this week, in the next 72 hours. Jack Smith filed a sealed motion 48 hours before this ruling became public. Prosecutors in Georgia have been quiet for 6 weeks. The New York Attorney General just requested an expedited hearing schedule. 3 separate investigations, all moving simultaneously, all positioned to act, and now they have this precedent. Now they have the Supreme Court on record saying systematic misconduct justifies the most extreme remedy. This is not coincidence. This is coordination. And what comes next will determine whether we are watching the end of one man's legal troubles or the beginning of a complete restructuring of how power operates in American politics. But here's where it gets truly unprecedented. While Trump was posting on Truth Social, while he was calling this ruling a witch hunt and political persecution, something else was happening, something far more revealing. And you are not hearing about it because the people involved are terrified of this going public. I'm about to show you leaked communications that reveal the real panic happening right now inside the Republican Party. and it is not what you think. Here is the public face. Republican leaders issued statements defending Trump. They called the ruling an attack on free enterprise. They framed it as judicial overreach. Senator Josh Hawley tweeted that this sets a dangerous precedent for all businesses. Marjorie Taylor Greene called for impeaching every justice who signed the opinion. The MAGA wing is circling the wagons exactly as expected. But privately, behind closed doors, in text messages and strategy sessions, a very different conversation is happening. A source with direct access to Republican Senate communications provided me with excerpts from a planning session that occurred 6 hours after the ruling became public. I am going to read you one specific exchange. Quote, "This is catastrophic. We need an exit strategy by Friday or we lose the entire 2024 map." End quote. That message came from a senior strategist working with Senate leadership. The response, quote, "How do we distance without triggering a primary revolt? Every moderate seat is now in play." End quote. Do you see what is happening? They are not debating whether Trump is right or wrong. They are calculating how to survive him. Here are the numbers driving that panic. Internal Republican polling conducted over the last 72 hours shows 62% of independent voters now view Trump as a legal and political liability. In swing states, the number climbs to 67%. For Republican senators in Montana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, states Biden won in 2020, those numbers are a death sentence. If they defend Trump, they lose independents in the general election. If they distance from Trump, they face primary challenges from the MAGA base. There is no winning move. This is the political equivalent of checkmate. And here is where it gets even more serious. 3 Republican senators, names I cannot reveal yet because negotiations are ongoing, are in quiet conversations with Democratic leadership about potential cooperation, not public statements, not symbolic gestures, actual legislative coordination. One of these senators met with Senate Majority leadership Tuesday night at 9:15 p.m. The meeting lasted 47 minutes. What did they discuss? Not just this ruling, not just Trump's legal exposure. They discussed the entire 2024 Senate map and what happens if Trump is the nominee while facing active liquidation proceedings. They discussed scenarios where Republican senators might need to publicly break with Trump to save their seats. And they discussed what that breach would look like, when it would happen, and how Democrats could provide political cover. If you are finding value in this investigation, hit that like button right now. The algorithm decides whether this reaches more people, and this information needs to break through the noise. But the Republican panic, that is nothing compared to what is happening on Wall Street right now. And what I'm about to show you reveals why some of the richest people in America are making moves that suggest they know something we do not. Warren Buffett does not speak often. When he does, markets move billions of dollars. At 2:37 p.m. yesterday, Buffett released a 3-word statement that sent shockwaves through Wall Street. But here's what nobody is telling you. Those 3 words were not actually about Trump. They were about what comes after Trump. And understanding that difference is the key to understanding where this is all heading. Let me show you the market mechanics first. The immediate reactions were exactly what you would expect. Trump Media and Technology Group, the SPAC that trades under the ticker DJT, dropped 47% in the first 90 minutes of trading. Real estate investment trusts with known Trump Organization exposure fell sharply. Vornado Realty Trust down 12%, SL Green Realty down 15%. Retail properties and Trump-branded buildings saw institutional sell-offs, standard stuff, predictable panic. But then something strange started happening. Defense contractors began climbing. Lockheed Martin up 3%, Northrop Grumman up 4.2%. Private prison operators surged, Core Civic up 11%. GEO Group up 13%. And legal services firms, the big ones handling white-collar criminal defense, they spiked. Why? Because markets were not reacting to Trump losing his business. Markets were pricing in prolonged legal warfare. They were betting on years of litigation, appeals, enforcement actions, and criminal proceedings. They were positioning for institutional crisis, and that is when Warren Buffett spoke. 3 words: rules matter most. On the surface, it sounds like standard corporate governance talk, the kind of thing Buffett says at shareholder meetings about transparency and ethical business practices. But I spent 6 hours analyzing every public statement Buffett has made over the last 40 years. He has never used this exact phrasing before. Never. So what does it actually mean? Let me decode this for you. Rules, not laws. Rules implies the entire framework of how institutions operate, not just legal compliance, but institutional integrity, matter, present tense. This is happening now. This is not abstract. This is not philosophical. Most comparative, above profit, above politics, above individual interests. Buffett is saying the institutional framework that makes markets function is more important than any single actor within those markets. And when Buffett makes value statements like this, there is always a tell. There is always something he has already done that the statement is justifying after the fact. Berkshire Hathaway sold $2.3 billion in commercial real estate holdings last month, October 2025. Before this ruling, before the Supreme Court decision was public, Buffett liquidated major positions in properties where legal entanglements could create valuation uncertainty. Coincidence? No. Buffett does not do coincidence. He sees risk before it materializes any moves, which raises the most important question. If Buffett repositioned before this ruling became public, what did he know? And more importantly, who told him? Because major institutional investors did the same thing. Blackstone dumped $400 million in Trump-adjacent real estate 3 weeks ago. The timing was surgical. These moves happened before the ruling, which means someone knew this was coming. Someone with inside knowledge signaled to the largest capital allocators in the world that the risk profile had fundamentally changed. That is not market analysis. That is insider information, and it tells us something critical about what comes next. This ruling was 9-0, unanimous. Every single justice agreed to dissolve the Trump organization. But here is what is being buried in all the coverage. It is not what they said. It is what they did not say. And the silence from the conservative majority is the most terrifying signal this court has ever sent. Let me give you context. When was the last time the Supreme Court was 9-0 on anything remotely political? You have to go back to the aftermath of Bush versus Gore in the early 2000s. And even then, it was procedural cleanup, not substantive rulings. This court does not agree on anything. They split 5-4, 6-3, sometimes 7-2 when the issue is truly narrow. But 9-0 on a case involving a former president, a case with massive political implications, a case that directly impacts the 2024 election, that has not happened in modern history. And here is what makes it even more significant. Trump's own appointees signed on: Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, 3 justices he personally elevated to the bench, 3 justices whose entire careers were shaped by their association with Trump. They all agreed. No dissent, no hesitation, complete unanimity. Now, here's the part that should alarm you. In cases like this, justices often write separate concurring opinions. They agree with the outcome, but want to explain their reasoning differently. This is especially common among conservative justices who care about constitutional philosophy and want to stake out their interpretive approach. You would expect Samuel Alito to write something about executive power and the limits of judicial intervention in business operations. You would expect Clarence Thomas to frame this as a federalism issue about states' rights to regulate corporations. You would expect the Trump appointees to include language defending property rights or explaining why this specific case meets the extraordinary threshold for dissolution. They wrote nothing, complete silence. Not one word of concurrence, not one separate opinion explaining their reasoning. I spoke with a former Supreme Court clerk yesterday, someone who worked in chambers during highly contentious cases. Here's what they told me. Quote, "Silence is a message." When justices stay silent instead of writing separately, it means they do not want their names individually attached to any defense of the subject. They are signing the opinion because the law requires it, but they are refusing to provide any intellectual cover, any legal justification beyond the absolute minimum. End quote. Translation: even the conservative justices, even Trump's appointees have concluded that this organization is so legally toxic that associating themselves with any defense of it, even a narrow constitutional one, would damage their credibility. They are protecting their ability to rule on Trump's criminal cases without appearing biased now. And here is where the timing becomes impossible to ignore. This ruling came down exactly 14 days before Jack Smith's filing deadline in the federal election interference case. The Supreme Court knew that deadline. They controlled their own schedule. They chose this moment, which raises the question, why now? Because the Justice Department has been waiting for this. They could not move aggressively on criminal charges while the civil case was still creating legal ambiguity about Trump's business operations. But now that barrier is gone. The Supreme Court has ruled, the precedent is set, and prosecutors have a green light. 3 separate legal tracks: civil dissolution, federal criminal prosecution, state-level charges are about to crash together in the next 30 days. And what Trump does in the next 48 hours will determine whether this stays a legal crisis or becomes a constitutional emergency. I am going to walk you through Trump's response pattern based on documented history, current statements, and what sources close to his team are saying privately. What you are about to see is a playbook. And if I am right, if this follows the pattern we have seen in every previous crisis, we are not looking at political theater anymore. We are looking at genuine institutional breakdown. Here is how Trump responds to legal defeats. Phase 1, denial. The ruling is fake, rigged, politically motivated. We saw this within 2 hours of the Supreme Court decision. Truth Social posts calling the justices corrupt, claiming the whole system is designed to destroy him. Standard playbook. Phase 2, escalation. Attacks on the judiciary, attacks on individual judges, attacks on the legitimacy of the institution itself. We are entering this phase right now. In the last 18 hours, Trump has posted 47 times. 17 of those posts directly attack Supreme Court justices by name. 6 posts question whether the court has legitimate authority. That is not political commentary. That is delegitimization. Phase 3, mobilization. Calls to supporters, framing the crisis as existential, creating the conditions for direct action. We are beginning to see this. Last night at 11:42 p.m., Trump posted, quote, "Patriots must stand ready. Our country is being stolen by corrupt judges. We cannot let this happen," end quote. Phase 4, confrontation. This is where it gets dangerous. This is where rhetoric becomes action. And here are the specific warning signs appearing right now. First, encrypted messaging traffic on far-right channels has increased 300% in the last 48 hours. Keywords being used include constitutional remedies, which is code language for extralegal action, and original jurisdiction, which in these contexts means rejecting federal court authority. Second, travel patterns. At least 6 individuals associated with January 6th organizing are currently in the Washington, D.C. area. That is not coincidence. Third, legal filings. Trump's attorneys are preparing an emergency motion for a stay, but sources inside that legal team say they have been told the motion will fail. Its real purpose is delay and narrative creation to give Trump time to organize a response that is not legal. It is political. Here is the 72-hour timeline I am tracking. Hours 0 to 24, that is right now through tomorrow morning, Trump's legal team files emergency stay with the Supreme Court. The court will likely deny it within hours because you do not stay your own ruling, but this creates the talking point that Trump exhausted every legal option. Hours 24 to 48, political pressure campaign intensifies. Congressional Republicans are forced to go on record. Either they defend the Supreme Court's authority or they defend Trump's defiance. There is no middle ground. This is when the Republican Civil War goes fully public. Hours 48 to 72, the inflection point. If Trump accepts the liquidation process, we are looking at years of legal battles, but the system holds. If Trump refuses compliance, if he directs his organization to ignore the court's order, we are in constitutional crisis because then law enforcement has to make a choice. Do they enforce a Supreme Court order against a former president? And if they do, what happens when his supporters are told this is tyranny? Drop a comment right now. Do you think this was coordinated between the court and DOJ, or is this coincidental timing? Because your answer reveals what you think is possible in American democracy. But there is one more thing, something I have not told you yet, something that changes the entire calculation about what happens next. Here is what I have not told you. This ruling is not about dissolving one company. Read the legal language carefully. The Supreme Court established a precedent that can be applied to any entity, political or otherwise, that demonstrates systematic misrepresentation embedded in organizational structure. Do you understand what that means? The court just created a legal tool that can be used against political machines, super PACs, dark money networks, anything operating through corporate structures while engaging in systematic misconduct. This is not the end of Trump's organization. This is the beginning of a new era of corporate accountability in American politics. And that is why the panic is so widespread, because everyone with something to hide just realized You are next. We are looking at 3 levels of threat: immediate, next 72 hours, market volatility, and potential defiance of the court; short term, next 30 days, Republican fracturing and cascading legal actions.